Hi, everyone. My name's Adrian Warnock. It's actually been a while since I've done one of these interviews, but I'm here today with a good friend of mine called Elle. So Elle, first of all, why don't you tell everyone how you and I met?
Yeah, hi everyone. I met Adrian through Shine, the Shine breakout group, which was, 6 weeks, and we met up every week, and it was such a great opportunity to meet people and talk about our cancer experience. And Adrian was another person with blood cancer, so we had similar stories in a way.
Yes, I mean similar and different, isn't it, Elle? Which is
Yeah.
maybe some of that will come out in today's conversation. So usually when I do these, it is very much a conversation, and so obviously Elle and I, we do know each other, but I don't know every detail of Elle's story because, of course, when you're in a sort of support group type environment, as we were for those few weeks, where we were also being taught by the fantastic people at Shine Cancer. So big plug for that. If you're in the UK and you have any type of blood cancer, actually, it's not exclusive to blood cancer. Any type of cancer, it's not exclusive to blood cancer, and you're in your 20s, your 30s, or your 40s, then that's a really great group to go and be a part of. And I know for me, it really helped me kind of process my journey. And maybe before we get into the details of yours, Eleanor, would you agree? I mean, what else would you say about that group that we were in together?
Yeah, for me, it just came at like the perfect timing because I just gone into remission and I was feeling quite lost, and I hadn't felt that like happiness about remission as I thought I would. And so it was just that place for me to go and process everything that had just happened in that whirlwind of 6 months or whatever, 6, 7 months. Um, and so that was really, really important. And by the end of it, I definitely felt like a lot lighter after every session, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the thing, isn't it, as you said, was meeting other people who kind of understood what you were going through, and who understood the journey. And I remember actually you talking about how, having just got into remission, you didn't feel the way you quote should, and the way everyone was telling you that you must be feeling. And I very strongly resonated with that. And in fact, if I remember, when I post this, certainly on our website, so this will be going up on bloodcanceruncensored.com if anyone's watching this somewhere else. And on the version there, and if I remember, I'll put it on other places where I can. I'll put a link to an article I wrote about how I felt when I went into remission, and how I said that, for me anyway, remission at the time almost felt like a crushing blow. It wasn't like the way everyone said. I remember sitting in a room with a consultant, eminent consultant, telling me, Adrian, it's great news. Your bone marrow is clear of cancer at the moment. We can't find it with our tests. I mean, our tests are quite sensitive. But then he said there almost certainly is some left for me. And this might be an interesting conversation for you in terms of your situation, because he said to me, it almost certainly will grow back in your case, Adrian, at some point. So this isn't like you're cured, which is what I think some of my friends and family thought when they heard the word remission. And for me, I was told that I had, great news. You've got a 2 in 3 chance, I was told, of making it to 5 or I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 years, I think 5 more years, without it coming back. And I remember for me personally, there were 2 things that hit me at that moment. First was, well, that's a 1 in 3 chance of me having to go through all of this again in just 5 years. That's not brilliant. Because I mean, like, would you go bungee jumping if it had a 1 in 3 chance of the rope breaking? Don't think you would, And then the second thing for me, and this is maybe what you can sort of chip in a bit more about, is I felt like, well, I feel so rubbish. I feel so ill. I'm still not anywhere near at that point, being able to work, and I'm still not, by the way. But I just thought, like, if this is the best I'm going to feel because the cancer's gone, or more or less gone, then what a depressing life I've got. And it's sort of all the trauma hit me as well. I mean, was that the same for you?
Yeah, I think I hadn't had any chance to process it throughout. I was running on fumes all the way throughout my treatment. And then afterwards, I think, it was just very, very, very anticlimactic. I was told over the phone, it's like 2-minute phone call, I think it was, with my nurse.
Yeah, because you're let's just say for the audience that you're a COVID cancer person, aren't you?
Yeah.
The
So
whole thing.
that's the other thing, is that I was told over the phone, because well, not actually, I was going to go in anyway to get my results, but my nurse was just so excited that he phoned me, and he wanted me to know as soon as possible, which was another thing, because I felt like I was going to psych myself up on the day of my appointment, and I was actually told a day before. And actually, I knew for a whole day. I didn't tell anyone. I just was like, what? Because I hadn't psyched myself up like either way. And anyway, yeah, it was still lockdown. It was the third lockdown in the UK. And so I couldn't do anything anyway. I couldn't do anything to celebrate. And it just felt like, what do we do? And like, I just remember I went down to my family and I just said, everyone come into the kitchen for a moment. I've gone into metabolic remission, because I was just repeating what my nurse had said, and my parents were like, does that mean like you're clear? And I was like, I think so. Like, it says remission, so he said remission, so I'm guessing so. And we were just kind of like, oh, okay, and then just went our separate ways. Like, it was in the middle of the day, everyone still had work, so it was just kind of like, okay, I guess I'll get back to uni work then. And that was that. It wasn't anything big or special, and I didn't feel anything big or special. And how I described it was that I didn't feel cancer. I didn't feel it in me. And so I didn't feel it missing. So I didn't feel when it had gone. And so it doesn't feel like, it just feels like you've gone through 6 months of torture. Everything has completely changed, and you don't feel much better for it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a bit like supposing you'd been in prison for 6 months being tortured.
It was just
someone
like,
lets you out, and then oh look, be happy, you're out. And in a way, I guess you are, but at the same time, you've just come out of that trauma.
yeah, I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong, I was happy to be done with chemotherapy.
Yes.
But it is a very weird psychological thing that, I didn't have any symptoms apart from a lump on my neck. So I genuinely didn't feel ill from cancer, but I felt ill from the treatment, very, very ill. And then to go through that and come out the other side a completely different person, like appearance wise and ability wise, just felt like, what have I done all of this for? Because I didn't feel it in the first place. It was quite hard. I wasn't conscious of it, of me trying to process this, but later on I have been. It's quite hard to wrap your head around that and feel okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the interesting things, and this is perhaps, obviously big part of this video, is to sort of raise awareness of people with blood cancers of all types, but specifically, obviously, your type, we'll come to that in a minute, and acute blood cancers, chronic blood cancers, all of them, in one sense, one thing we all have in common is it's trauma. And if you're going to be treated, it's trauma. If you're going to be diagnosed, it's trauma. And then when you come out the other end, you don't feel the same. And that was one of the things that came out in our group actually as well, that none of us felt the same. We all felt, you almost like look in the mirror and it's like, who's looking back?
Yeah, I had I still sometimes do, a complete identity crisis. I didn't recognize myself. I still, in my mind's eye, I am the person I was before cancer. And it comes down to the most minute, almost like trivial things. Like if I'm writing a text, right, I don't know which emoji to use, because I don't, usually in the past, I've always used the blonde girl,
What, with the long hair? Or
Yeah. I'm not that emoji anymore. I still use it because that's in my mind's eye. I still look like that, and I forget that I don't look like that when I meet new people as well. And so it's just another whole thing that when I was going through it, I didn't even think about, because it was just the last of my priorities. I didn't care about losing my hair at the time, because it was just like, oh, just get me through this, I don't care. But afterwards it's like, oh right, now I'm stuck with this look, I'm stuck with this. Great, what do I do now?
Yeah, it wasn't, I mean, some people obviously would choose to look like you do now, Elle, and you know, you do look lovely, but at the same time, it's like that wasn't your choice, was it?
Yeah, as a reference, I had like blonde bob. Yeah, and I was also quite physically fit as well. Yeah, and that changed a lot.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like we're doing a spoiler here, but I mean, it's good to do that in a way, to start at the end and then go
Yeah,
back to
so
the
sick.
beginning. But I think it's interesting what you said as well, because like this whole business about awareness, I mean, you know, Blood Cancer UK and some of the other blood cancer charities do this whole kind of awareness thing and trying to make sure people are aware of symptoms and signs that they're supposed to do something about. And of course, one of the sad things is that sometimes people have a lump in the neck and they ignore it. And I mean, it's worth saying at this point, isn't it, that the vast majority of people who get a lump in their neck, it is probably going to be, if they're a young person, something like glandular fever or whatever. And I know that because I've seen that in my own family, where somebody had a huge lump appear and then disappear. And obviously they got the diagnosis of glandular fever, and then you think, oh, phew, thank goodness for that. But like, some people, I think, don't necessarily ask for help straight away. What led you to sort of realize that you needed to go to the doctor? Or
So my initial reaction was that I'd slept funny. And because I had slept funny, my neck was hurting, and that's how I massaged my neck, and that's how I found it.
Oh, I see. So in a way, it's almost a good thing that you slept funny that day, because you might have noticed it, or at least not earlier.
When I then looked in the mirror and I saw it, I was like, that has come out of nowhere.
How big was
and
it?
I would say it was like that big.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
Just
noticeable then, but not only if you.
Yeah, it was quite underneath, but yeah, it came out like this, I'd say. Like you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to see that curve in my neck, basically.
Right. So do you think it had been there for a little while then, or do you think it had literally come up?
I have no idea, and basically what happened was that, so I've had glandular fever. I had glandular fever when I was 17, and that really wiped me out. I did school part-time because of glandular fever, so that was really bad for me. And my initial thought went to glandular fever, but it was quite low down. And you know, still I've always had problems with my throat and tonsillitis and all of that. So I went to my mum, and I was just sort of like, I found this, and it's just I don't know what's happened. I don't know whether it's like a knot, like, you know how you get in your back, and I just slept funny and it's come to my neck. And my mum just instantly, mums are like, I don't like lumps, call the doctor.
Well,
so I called the doctor, and that was
good mum, eh? Good mum.
yeah. And honestly, I say this with caution because I know how horrible the pandemic has been, but it was almost a blessing in disguise for me, because if it weren't for the pandemic, I would have still been living in Spain. And if I was living in Spain at the time, I probably wouldn't have gotten checked out as quickly as I did.
Wow. That's it's amazing how things work out like that sometimes, isn't it? That you know, that some people would say, oh, that's the universe looking out for you, and obviously some people would have faith and say it was God looking out for you. But whatever your position on that, it's good. it's a good thing that happened that way for you.
Yeah, I think for me it's just a point of being grateful for. And then so I called the doctor, and I think it was a Friday or a Thursday, and he was like, oh, that's weird, it's come out of nowhere. Keep looking over it over the weekend, and if it's gotten any bigger, then I'll get you in for some blood tests next week. And over the weekend, it got to Monday and I had a feel around my neck and I found another lump. And that's when I was like, this is not normal and this is not my glands. And I still wasn't like, like, I personally, my mind didn't go straight to cancer. I only went to cancer because when my mum mentioned it. And then I had blood tests for glandular fever. I had a COVID test because my doctor thought it might be like a weird reaction to COVID, something they hadn't seen. But he basically then had a feel around.
Also, you actually got to see a doctor in pandemic. That's good.
Yeah. Just because he was quite concerned. He had a feel around and he found a few more. So I had the blood test for.
But these were small, the ones that he found, presumably, if you hadn't seen.
Yeah, so he found one here that was quite sizable, to be fair, and then a few more like peas around here. And yeah, I had my blood test for glandular fever, for I guess my white blood cells, and a COVID test. And
I presume for you, if I'm got my head right, was the white blood cell test normal, or was that abnormal for you?
It all came back normal.
Yeah, because that's one of the misconceptions people have about blood cancer, is that, oh yeah, just send off a blood test and you'll see on a simple blood test. That's true for some blood cancers. You would see. I mean, for mine, my lymphocyte count was really high, but that's because mine was growing in the blood, and so they often call that leukemia. Although mine's a bit weird because it's a leukemia and a lymphoma. But yours, because it was a lymphoma, there would have been no abnormalities, certainly not on a normal blood test anyway, a basic full blood count. It wouldn't have been detected. So what did they do then? If it came back with normal blood results, what was the next step?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I was told that it wasn't lymphoma because it all came back clear.
Wow. So that's unfortunate, because obviously, that a normal blood test does rule out certain types of blood cancer like mine, but it doesn't rule out other types of cancer like yours.
Yeah, so on one hand, it was unfortunate, but on the other hand, I did have a very good doctor who then went to dig further. So he didn't just leave me.
Well, that's good. And that's a really important point, isn't it? If you've got a lump, or if you've got, things like fatigue or achy bones or all these other symptoms that you can see listed on those websites, they can all be a bit non-specific, and 90% of the time they don't necessarily mean blood cancer. And that's why it's so important that either you and or your doctor pursue these things sometimes to find out what the problem is. And the way I often say to people is to rule out blood cancer, and obviously at this point the GP thought he had ruled out blood cancer, but he didn't give up on finding out what was going on. So that's good. And if your GP, if it feels like they're giving up, then sometimes the patient has to push to go to the next level. So what was the next thing you did?
So the next thing was a referral to ear, nose, throat department at the hospital.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just kind of trying to find out what it was, because he just didn't think it was cancer, and he didn't think it was COVID, and didn't think it was glandular fever. So I had a biopsy.
And was that done quite quickly, by the way, Elle, that appointment?
I think that was within like 2 weeks or something, or maybe, yeah, because it was a 2-week
rule thing,
urgency scan thing.
So he must have still been sort of not 100% sure it wasn't cancer, just thought it wasn't blood cancer then, because thing is for cancer, isn't it? Did he tell you that? Or did he not tell you
no, he didn't tell me that. It was more like, I'm going to put this through as a 2-week cancer scan, but don't worry, I don't think it's that.
Okay. Yeah, the GPs do that a lot, actually, because in the UK, if you want things done quickly, if you put it's query cancer, then they'll do it in 2 weeks. So that's actually something useful, because I know a lot of people find our site sometimes when they're worrying that they've got blood cancer. And, obviously in your case, it was blood cancer. In my case, it was blood cancer. But for many people with the sort of position you were in, it would have turned out to be something else. And so it's important to realize that just because you've been referred in that 2-week cancer rule, that it doesn't necessarily mean that's what you've got. But of course, it must have played on your mind a little bit, did it? Or were you just kind of calm at that point?
I was quite, because I've been told it wasn't anything scary, I just took that as
At face value.
Yeah, and I was worried about the biopsy and how it would feel. So basically what they did was they did an ultrasound to find, where they were going to take the biopsy from. And it was just, one of those needle biopsies. It really wasn't, apart from some pressure and like the big click, it wasn't anything.
So they didn't cut your neck and get the whole lymph node out. They just took a sample, which is often enough. It's often all they need.
Yeah, that was all they needed. And that was sent, so that was at my local hospital, and that was sent to Southampton Hospital. Well, they tested it and it came back with lymphoma, but they needed to send it to Southampton to be able to determine, the exact type, and confirm that it was Hodgkin's.
Yeah, because I think, just to help people who don't know what we're talking about here, so the majority of lymphomas, the vast majority of lymphomas, and some of the leukemias, including the one I've got, all come from lymphocytes. So the lymphocytes have become cancerous, and so they can see at that initial screen, oh, we've got cancerous lymphocytes here, but then they have to look at them a bit more in detail to identify which of, oh gosh, I think it's several hundred different types of blood cancer that there actually are. So when they explained that you'd got Hodgkin's lymphoma, I mean, talk to me about that. Was that face-to-face, or was that over the phone because of COVID, or what happened?
I had an awful experience with my diagnosis. I was due to have a phone call appointment. I think it was maybe 11, I think it was like the 11 a.m. I know it was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, I think it was. And I got no phone call. So I phoned them. I was waiting for a phone call. I'm like waiting to find out the results from my biopsy. When will I be phoned? Oh yeah, this afternoon. No phone call came. Called them again the next morning. Oh yeah, we'll phone you this afternoon. Sorry, we're really busy. Right, okay. Phone them, no phone call. I phoned them the next day. We made a complaint because obviously we understood the NHS was under so much pressure, but I just couldn't help but feel if this was an in-person appointment, which it would have usually been, I wouldn't have been sat in a waiting room for 3 days.
No, you wouldn't.
And
I mean, I've had some long waits, but not that long.
Yeah, and especially for like the news that you're waiting for, it was quite bad. And
so,
then
from the point of view of referral as well, so this must have been now like from the time the GP, when you first saw a doctor, we're now talking what, 20 days at least, was it? Or
I can actually tell you. I always
doesn't really matter, I suppose, but it's just
I
it's
kept
just a measure of how
diary.
difficult it is. Oh yeah. So for me, while you're looking that up, I'll just say for me, I had 19 days from being told that my blood test was abnormal, my lymphocyte count was high. There was these funny things called smear cells, which essentially means that the lymphocytes were dying, and so that is almost indicative of the type of cancer I had. But I had 19 days to wait before I got a diagnosis. And I only got the diagnosis by going private, believe it or not. The NHS were just faffing around, wouldn't give me the diagnosis. And it's very bizarre. They were just like leaving you in that limbo of sort of a 3/4 diagnosis in my case. But even if it's just the possibility, it's still a horrendous thing because you're worrying for all that time. You found out how long it was.
Yeah, so I can give you like a brief timeline. So I noticed the lump on the 20th of May, and
So
then
2020, yeah, or
yeah, so 2020. 6 days later, I had that consultation with my doctor with the blood tests, and he checked my neck.
It was right in the middle of COVID. It is worse.
Yeah, this was just before the lockdown ended in summer. And then 2 days later, the blood test came back fine, but I was referred to the ear, nose, throat department. I had my ultrasound and biopsy on the 12th of June, 12th of June. And on the 18th of June, I got the results. So almost a month between noticing the lump and finding out the results, which I don't think was that bad. Yeah, and I felt very lucky that my doctor dug so quickly and put me through so quickly. But then, yeah, from there, very quick. So 18th, I got the results. 25th, I had my PET scan, and 26th, I had my first chemo session.
Right. So all systems go, but just let me back up for a moment. You get the phone call. How was that for you?
I think this is one of the symptoms of COVID, the pandemic. It was, first of all, very, very quick and out of the blue, because, you know, I'd been waiting and I just stopped. I just stopped like sitting by my phone because it had been 3 days. And so I got
so you're just literally sitting in your house in lockdown and suddenly the phone goes.
Yeah, I was in my room on my own.
Poor thing.
And I just picked up the phone because I didn't even think to like run downstairs or to anyone or anything. And it was a registrar.
Was it one of those number withheld calls or something as well? So did you know
it had the number, but I didn't have any like ID for it.
So you had no preparation at all. You just, oh, it's the doctor from the hospital. Oh, right.
Yeah. And then he said, so I'm sorry to say, but it's come back as lymphoma. We think it's Hodgkin's lymphoma, but we're sending it off to Southampton to confirm the exact type. Do you have any questions? I was like,
yeah, 1,000.
I was just like, okay. At this point, my like chin was wobbling, but like I was just holding it back because I was just absolutely shocked. And I was like, what does this mean? Do I have chemo? When do I start? Like what? And then he was like, well, I can't really answer that because I'm from ENT. I'm not an oncologist. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thank you. And then just hung up the phone. And it was a 5-minute phone call.
Wow. No nurse to kind of give you a hug or talk to you afterwards, or?
So yeah, it was just like, he'd obviously been, it wasn't the doctor that I was supposed to have the appointment with. So he'd obviously been palmed off with this phone call to give, and wasn't trained to, like, that's not his specialty. So like,
Dreadful.
Not their department, that's not what they deal with. So they just said, yeah, he just said, we've referred you to oncology. And so I then had the consultation with my oncologist, my hematologist. I never know what to call him. I guess he's both. Because it's the hematology department, but I guess, yeah. And so I had consultation 5 days later, and they didn't know whether I'd been told or not.
So how was that 5 days? That must have been really difficult because you have no clue. I mean, did you Google stuff, or did you try and keep away from that, or what did you do? Everyone says don't Google, but I bet you did, didn't you? I
don't really remember. So I'm always the type of person that I don't Google, and I ignorance is bliss for me. And I think I played that, I did that all the way through. I know that everyone around me was Googling, everyone that I had told. So those 5 days were kind of filled with telling family and close friends. But it was a weird one because you still don't know what's in store. I didn't know whether I was having chemo or not, because that phone call didn't tell me anything. So I was just still in limbo. And then it was the consultation with the oncologist, and I went with my mum, and I've got to say she was more emotional than I was. I think I was just shell-shocked the whole way through. I was just like trying to absorb this information that they were giving me, and I was just like, then we went into a room with the nurse and talked about it a bit more, and she gave us some leaflets and booklets and all of that, and describing the chemotherapy, what it was, how long it would be, yeah, and just trying to wrap our heads around it. But the main thing was just that, so the main questions that I went into that consultation was my fertility, and losing my hair, whether I could have a cold cap, because that's the one thing. I know what I did in those 5 days. I started listening to a podcast about cancer. I think it's called You, Me and the Big C or something like that. It's a BBC podcast, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and that was quite good because it was quite light-hearted. It didn't really touch on gruesome stuff, but the one thing I had heard about was cold caps, and I was like, I don't want to lose my thick, gorgeous blonde hair. And then those 2 questions were answered very easily with, you don't have time for fertility treatment, and also I'm quite young, don't have a partner to do that with, kind of thing. And second, you can't have a cold cap because it's a blood cancer. So that was that. So I was like, right. So I think I was more focused on the fact that I was going to lose my hair and that I might come out of this infertile. Not majorly, like, because I've been reassured that it wasn't a certain side effect of it, but it was going through my head. That was the first thing that I thought of. But yeah.
And in terms of, like prognosis and things like that, was that something you sort of thought much about at that time, or was it not even really much time to think about that? Because I think this is one of the differences perhaps between like your experience, where you've been diagnosed with what's a very acute cancer, and that's maybe something worth stressing for some people who might be watching this who have a more chronic blood cancer, and those 2 journeys are really quite different, because for the chronic one, it's basically, yeah, you've got blood cancer. Maybe it's even spread to every part of your body and you've got lymph nodes everywhere and blood everywhere, but we're not going to do anything. Just leave it until you get sick. You're not sick enough to be treated. And yet your experience is kind of different to that, because obviously you weren't feeling sick. And yet they're saying we need to do really quickly something to save your life, essentially, in order to then make you feel very sick. So it's kind of, I guess, a different journey, really. But what was that like? I mean, that whole process, did you have much chance to reflect on the diagnosis, or was it literally, right, down to earth, let's get this all sorted? What am I going to put in my bag for my chemo sessions? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was more like that. It was more like, how am I going to get through this chemo? And I think it was just such a whirlwind. It was like, one of the things that came up when I asked about fertility was that it would just take too long. He was like, I'm sorry, you don't have the time. Because the PET scan showed that I was stage 2. And he was like, by the time that you could do all of that, you could be stage 4 and it could be fatal.
Wow. So that's pretty shocking. It's like, look, stop thinking about your hair. Stop thinking about the possibility of future babies. We've got to move, and we've got to move quickly.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It was like, it was made very clear, like, if this had been left any longer, it would have been a lot worse. And I would have been in a quite a sticky situation. But it was also very reassuring. He was like, most people get through this chemo quite easily. We'll come on to that. I didn't. And also that the success rate of this chemo, is so high. Don't worry about not getting.
When they say success, what do they mean success? Do they mean cure? Do they mean?
Yeah, so going into remission.
And then does it then come back, or does it usually not come back?
So yeah, so for As far as I'm aware, again, I'm not the best person to ask, because I do quite literally keep myself ignorant to it all.
That's important, because I think people have different strategies, and some people want to know everything and some people really don't. So yeah, you decided to.
Yeah, I decided not to. I didn't mind other people doing it and then maybe asking them questions, but I didn't want to know.
That's fair enough.
So as far as I'm aware, if you're going to get it again, it usually comes within the first year.
Right.
And then, yeah, you're still an outpatient for 5 years. So you get your 3-month checkups, and then that goes to, like, I think 6 months, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the kind of situation that it is.
And that's the difference, I suppose, between the acute and the chronic, is that the acute ones, obviously you're in a race against time, and in the past almost everybody died. That was the reality, and quite quickly. But now with treatment, almost everybody lives. And so, you know, that's and a huge number of those people won't get a recurrence, and that's true for most of these acute cancers. I mean, obviously each one's different, and there are obviously some people who do get into trouble, but you know, generally it's a weird sort of thing, though, isn't it? You must have been quite weird being told, on the one hand, look, this is trying to kill you and kill you fast, but listen, we're going to help you, and we can help you fast, but we've got to move. Versus the sort of more chronic one, where the message seems to be, sorry, we're never really going to be able to get rid of this. It's going to be with you for the rest of your life. But don't worry, it's not going to kill you anytime soon. But you're going to feel worse. And when you feel worse, then we'll treat you and hopefully be a bit better for a while, but then it will come back. So it's kind of and the problem is, of course, if someone's had that kind of chronic message and they meet somebody who's had the acute message, that there might be a miscommunication or vice versa. And the weird thing is that, so like you have a Hodgkin's lymphoma, which everyone knows is aggressive. So they don't even call it acute. They just say a Hodgkin, which I always think is a weird name. It's just some Victorian gentleman who named it. But then the other big group is non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, which actually ironically includes CLL, which is actually leukemia, but hey ho. So I have a leukemia that's a subtype of a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But some of those are more acute, like, so they would be treated more similarly to yours, and others of them are more chronic, and so they'd be treated more similarly to mine. It might include things like watching and waiting, which is of course the one thing you couldn't do.
Yeah, I know that. So for me, it was like whatever stage that I was still going to get the same treatment, and I knew that. I knew of someone who had non-Hodgkin's, and they had a very similar treatment. But the thing is with with these 3-month checkups that I've been having, one thing has also been made clear is that if I do get this again, it's going to be a lot worse. And I'm going to need stem cell transplants and the whole shebang, and chemo is going to be a lot worse. And he was basically, you really don't want it again. That's the main message, is like, you really don't.
But it's like, how are you supposed to stop that? You know,
I know. And every time that 3-month comes up, it's a bit like, oh God. But that's also like the really good thing about them, because that's when you catch them early by having checkups so often. But yeah, it does, that 3rd month, I'm always a bit like, oh God. Yeah, so it does play on your mind. But
do they do scans for you for every 3 months as well, or just feeling?
No, it's just blood tests.
Yes, because the very sensitive blood test can pick it up. That's the other thing, isn't it? So it's like, just because the normal FBC full blood count doesn't pick it up, I guess they pick it up using their fancy blood tests.
And they're also checking things like my immune system and stuff like that. So checking that's all recovering as well, which it was the last time we checked. So
wonderful news. I mean, that's great. So just talk a bit though about the experience of chemo, because you said it wasn't easy for you.
No. And it wasn't easy for anyone around me either. I have to give a shout out to my parents and my family, just for absolutely carrying me through some of those really dark weeks. So I had 6 months of ABVD. The first 2 cycles made me neutropenic, and my body was just in an utter shock. I felt so sick, but never vomited. I think that was just like, it's one of those things where you feel like you want to because you just feel so sick. I didn't have much appetite, you know. I had really bad jaw pain. And like sort of ulcers in my mouth. I then also started getting, what's it called? Neuropathy. So I was twitching a lot. And this was all happening at the height of summer as well, when it was really, really hot. We had heat waves over this period, and it was just so uncomfortable. Everything hurt. This was happening for like, so I had 1 chemo session every other week. I just had no recovery. I had no period of time in between my chemo sessions where I felt okay. Maybe like 1 or 2 days where I didn't feel sick. But I was just in constant like, this is horrible, this is the worst. And then, yeah, for the first, I think 2 cycles, I got called into hospital, taken into hospital because of different symptoms that, you know, were worrying. And then we started testing different anti-sickness drugs, and that helped, but still was bedridden for at least a week and a half after every one. And just so ill, and I just couldn't do anything. And it just really frustrated me because all the leaflets were like of people who was sort of like their stories being like, yeah, I, you know, would have my chemo on a Friday morning, and then by the Monday I'd be in work again and be absolutely fine. And I was just like, why is this so different for me? Like, and even watching other people go through it after me, I'm like, they're having a great time. But obviously not a great time, but like they were having a normal life other than the chemo. And I was just like, I get that this is just, I'm only getting, you know, the best bits, but yeah, I was like, they're walking. I mean, first of all, and it was just horrible. And then my hair started falling out, and when I tell you I had thick hair, I had very thick hair. There was a lot of hair to come out, and it was just everywhere. And it was just so upsetting to see it just come out. And then it started getting painful because, you know, all of this hair is sort of like kind of being pulled out of its follicles. And everything. And then my veins closed up. It was so painful to get my treatment put in. They couldn't get any blood out. So
did you have a port in the end, or? I
got a PICC line in the end. And that really helped. But then, because I think it's probably because of your immune system, I started getting allergic reactions to a lot of things. So I mean, I still kind of have some scars. The dressings, like just my whole arm became blistered. And the same with any type of cannula. Like I have a scar on this hand just from where a cannula was put in because my skin was so sensitive. My hands started peeling. They were just constantly hot red, and they were peeling. My feet peeled. It was just, my body was destroyed by this. And that was with adjustments and stuff. And then I started getting, I think maybe the worst symptom for me was anticipatory nausea. So towards the end, if anyone doesn't know, it's kind of where the chemo has made you feel sick, And so your brain starts making those links with noises, smells, anything that's going on at the time of when you feel sick, to link that with that feeling of sickness. So anytime I was just in hospital, I'd feel sick. Anytime I'd smell anti-bac, I'd feel sick. I think the first chemo session I had a cup of tea whilst I was having it. I then was sworn off cups of tea. I couldn't drink them. I had a really heightened sense of smell. I couldn't really open the fridge. It just made me feel sick. And that is sort of like a psychological thing that has lasted as well, unfortunately. So, I mean, just the other day I was on a train and there was a beeping noise and it sounded like
Gosh, the hospital.
it
Yeah.
sounded like the hospital.
Yeah.
And I was almost gagging.
Oh, you poor thing.
So
Oh,
it does really affect you. And my doctor, basically what he did was put me on lorazepam to try and just sedate me a little bit and get that away, but we didn't quite nip it in the bud soon enough for it not to take an effect. So yeah, that was probably the worst bit, because it just meant that before I even had chemo, I was feeling sick. And I was taking anti-sickness tablets then, just on my normal days. And so it was just kind of like very prolonged, because anti-sickness tablets and lorazepam makes you very drowsy, and then I couldn't really do work. And my timetable at that towards like October, November time was working up right up until injection, and then bedridden, and then working again right up until injection, so I could fit everything in. So that, yeah, buggered that. Sorry.
Well, there you go. But you made it through, didn't you? You got to remission. We've already done. It's funny, we did this kind of backwards, so we already did the good news bit. And I guess you're pretty close to that year now as well, aren't you? And you're back doing ridiculous numbers of things. I mean, Elle has her finger in a million pies, and we unfortunately don't really have time to sort of go into all the things that Elle does now. But like, obviously, you're not entirely out of the woods in terms of the effect that chemo has on you. I get that, but you're doing pretty well. Would you say? Well, that's how it looks to me anyway. When I hear what you get up to, I get exhausted just hearing what you're doing. So.
Yeah, I am quite a busybody, and I am very fortunate to have not bounced back to normal, but bounced back to a normal enough, a new normal that makes me feel sane, basically.
And you've got a life to look forward to. That's the point, isn't it? And so that's the crucial message, I suppose, for someone watching this maybe in the middle of that dreadful experience of chemo, which isn't always dreadful for everyone. That's the important thing. So if someone's watching this and about to start chemo, they do need to hear that Elle's experience isn't everyone's experience. Yeah, you had one of the worst experiences. I won't talk about my experience today because mine wasn't brilliant, but yours was even worse than mine.
I will put a disclaimer that my doctor said that he had literally never seen anyone with this many side effects. So just take that as, a pinch of salt, so that you know that mine wasn't sort of like an abnormal case.
But if you are having that bad experience, maybe you're in hospital, they know what to do. If you have a problem, the doctors know how to handle it. They'll sort you out. They'll get you out. Bit of neutropenia, all of that kind of stuff. They've got the drugs to give you. The injections, they really do work. Those things you get in the belly, I had those too. And actually, it's so important at that moment to realize that there is a hope. There's a reason you're doing this. And Elle, if she hadn't have done this, obviously we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? So you went through it. You were willing to pay the cost so that now, thanks to all the work of doctors and researchers and patients critically who volunteered for all those clinical trials, you're facing a bright, hopefully, future that will mean that you can go out and change the world. And believe you me, Elle's going to go change the world in the things she does. I know from the conversations I've had, and you'll hear more about Elle, I hope. And I'm going to have to leave it there because we've been talking for a lot longer than
sorry, I talked your ear off.
I don't know if, you know, I could keep going, but I think we should probably you know, let you go now, and all the best, Al. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Any last words as you leave?
No, just thank you so much for having me, and it was great. It was great chatting.
That's great.